All right, the mold is cured. This particular laminating resin still had a tacky feel to the outside. So when I have that, I just put a little coat of some rattle can primer on the outside, and that'll get rid of the tack. I usually label my molds, so I put on here what this is. Since it is done, we'll go ahead and I'll start peeling off all the tape and the exterior portions of this flange, and then we'll see what it looks like as it meets up to the actual plug, because I'll probably go ahead and pre-sand all this to make sure I don't have any high spots or something overlapping over to the actual master on the underside here. So that way when you pull it out, you don't chip chunks of the gel coat trying to remove it out of here. So I'll go ahead and get this removed, pause the video, get this removed. We'll come back, show you if I have any of those kind of things, and we'll talk about them and go from there. That's it. All right, the tape's been removed. It actually looks really well. As far as you can see, there's not much bleed under the tape. There was a couple little spots on the edge. I'll have to clean those up, and what I'll do is I will pre-sand those to get them down, or try to some way to get them clean back. You don't want nothing on the edge, so that way when I go to pull the mold or plug out, then we'll have very little chipping on the edge. So I will go ahead and do this cleanup, and then when we're ready to pull it back out, I'll probably go ahead and trim this off out here, simply because these little edges and points are really sharp, and I don't want to risk getting a splinter. So anyways, I will stop the video again, and we'll get this a little bit more cleaned up. All right, we got all the tape off. I went ahead and trimmed the outer edge of the flange to get rid of the high spots. And as you can see, it's pretty thick with that 5 layers on there. It gives a good stability this way. And I knocked off some of the high spots. You can actually still see there's a little bit, that's the actual PVA film that's on there. And it'll peel right off like so. You see it's really thin, but that'll wash off with simple water. It'll actually dissolve it, but you can actually peel it off of there. So anyways, sometimes with demolding a part, air works great. It helps. If not, then you may have to use plastic wedges, things of that nature, so you don't scar up the internal surface of the actual mold. Usually when you start get it going, then you can it'll start to come free. So I don't know how else this is going to work, trying to do it up on a workbench, but we will give it a try and see if the air works. Basically, you take the air nozzle, make sure you got one that's got the point style, either you got rubber tips or whatever, and it has a single hole in it, and it basically shoots a beam of air rather than spreading the air out. So you come in between the edge of the mold and the plug. All right, let's see if we can get a little bit of, may have to put this down on the floor so I got some better leverage on it. They can tend to be a little hard because, you know, it's a rigid mold. But anyways, I'll pause the video, I'll get this thing out, and then we'll come back to it. All right, we got it apart. And the air helped a little bit, but not as much as I expected it to. As you can see, it came out, and the PVA, it's like plastic. It's really, really, really thin. I mean, this is thinner than paper. So what it really took to get the part out of the mold was the wedges. So being I cleaned up the edge of the mold, I took and got this in here, and I had to clamp the edge in a vise and got a small gap in there, and then I got one of my thin plastic wedges in there. I only used it by hand. I was pushing them in by hand, just kept working it all the way down, so it's kind of breaking it free. You don't want to overload it because you can physically break or crack your mold or crack the gel coat, and you don't want to do that. So anyways, that's what it took. Once I ran the wedge down, you know, all I did was run in, push it in, get a gap, and then move the next one in, and just basically worked it one by one until down one side. And then I stuck a little wrench in here, and poof, it popped right out. So I'll go ahead and go wash this up, and then we'll come back to the video. All right, we're back. We got it, the mold just washed up, basically a wet rag, and wiped it down. You could probably go through your air hose, and that would get more of the bigger chunks off first. But now the mold is done. I'm gonna take and actually wet sand it. I need to go through and knock this sharp edge off on all around it, and clean up any other little issues that I may see. For the most part, the mold is straight up ready to use. When I get done wet sanding it, I'll probably apply 5 layers of wax to it in the time frame, so that kind of seasons the mold with the wax. And then, you know, when you lay up your parts, you'll have it waxed. If you're going to use PVA, you'll want to coat the PVA same thing way you did it with the plug. And then you can apply your gel coat first. And then for this particular part, I may just do 1 layer of matting, and then a top layer of the 3/4 inch cloth, woven cloth. So it'll give it a much smoother surface finish on the inside. And because if you've ever seen like the carbon fiber wheel huggers and stuff, they're super thin. But the 1.5 ounces in the actual woven mat or woven cloth inside here will give a little bit thicker surface to work with. So we'll see. I'll experiment with it with, like I said, with 1.5. If that's not enough, then I'll go with 2 layers. But that should be more than ample for a wheel hugger at this point. So I'll stop the vid. I'm gonna get this thing cleaned up, and then I will lay up and get it waxed, and then lay up the first item out of it, show you what it looks like in the mold, and show you how to get, when you have a dump mold like this, those parts generally come out much easier than the plug did, because the actual part that you lay up is much thinner and much more flexible, so it generally pulls out. Plus you have the residual fiberglass sticking up out of the mold that you've laid in here, and you got something to actually grab a hold of with pliers, whatever, and it comes out pretty easy. Anyways, I'll get this all sanded up and we'll come back. All right, the mold has been wet sanded and then buffed out. Use a little rubbing compound with my buffer, and I only worry about the internal section of the mold. You can see it's got a nice gloss. It doesn't really need the nice gloss. It does help with getting the parts in and out of the mold when you lay them up. So now that the mold is done, it's been waxed, and it is ready to receive gel coat to make the first part. So I will go ahead and stop the video again, and I'm going to go ahead and spray this baby up and get a part being made off of it. So that's it. We'll see you back in a few. Okay, we're back. The mold has been sprayed. From the previous clip, I wanted to reiterate something. This is a brand new mold. Even though it has 5 coats of wax on it, it's still not seasoned. I typically like to season my molds. So what I do to season it is before I spray something in it, I apply a coat of wax, a good thin film of wax, and I don't wipe it out. I don't buff it out. So I leave the sheen actually in there. And then that helps with the parts removal. After you've run a few parts off the mold starts to get seasoned, and then then you can start, cleaning the mold out and buffing it. Or you can actually just use PVA and spray where you'll have a nice gloss sheen. But if you leave the wax unbuffed in there, your surface is not going to be nice and glossy. For most everybody, that doesn't matter because you're going to sand it and paint it to the color that you want. But if you need a nice glossy surface, then you're gonna have to just use PVA. If not, just wipe spread the wax in there, let it air dry out, and then spray your gel coat and then let it roll, or use PVA. So I'm gonna let this cure, and then I'm gonna prep and get my 1.5 ounce mat cut so it'll sit in place. I'll have it all ready. I'm going to use 2 layers of 1.5 ounce mat in here. 2 layers is probably a little overkill, maybe, but I don't know if 1 would be enough. It may make it too flexible if I just did 1. I'll try 2. If 2's not enough, then I'll just make another one. But at this point, we're going to go with 2. So I'll put this off to the side and I'll show you my spray gun. All right, here is my spray gun. It is a standard Harbor Freight cheapy spray gun. It's a HV type gun, and there's only a couple modifications that I did to it. I've used this spray gun for a very, very long time. You can probably tell it looks pretty beat up, but it's been used for so many years. I think that this one's like number 2 out of the 20-something years of doing molds. Anyways, the only mods that I've done to it is the needle and the tip. From a factory standpoint, you can get away with the little part that sticks out right here on the actual tip. Drill it out, but don't break through the outer surface, because when this thing's screwed on, that tip protrudes just a small fraction past here, and that's what allows the gun to work, to take and remove the material through the tube and then atomize it through here. The actual pin that's in there, I changed the shape a little bit. Basically all you're trying to do is plug the hole, because gel coat's so thick, you're not worrying about having a precision spray pattern. You're mainly just trying to lob it into the mold, and that's the best precision that you're gonna get. When it sprays it, it's almost like a splatter gun. It just splatters it out there. Basically same thing a cup gun would do if you had a professional cup gun to spray, big giant molds. But this works perfect for me and all the molds that I've done over the years. My biggest mold is 6 feet long and 12 inches wide. And this holds more than enough gel coat to spray that entire mold. So if you're making small parts like this, anything for a motorcycle or just basically small parts, this would be more than adequate. You use much less gel coat when you spray versus actually putting it on by a paintbrush. So, I mean, for this particular mold, I probably used about 2 ounces, maybe 2 ounces of gel coat, and that's sprayed in there extremely heavy. So, with doing it with a paintbrush, I would have probably easily used 4 to 6 ounces of gel coat in order to get that spread in there. So anyways, and this particular tip, I've actually modified it even farther. I drilled the tip out, and then I machined this portion right here out of 1/8 inch stainless rod, and I bored the hole out somewhere in the 90 thousandths. I used wire gauge drill bits, somewhere in the 90 thousandths range. So it's still given, you know, 10 to 15 thousandths wall thickness on the outside. And I machined the surface just a little bit on the, and then I actually precision reamed this to 0.125, and this was because the stainless rod I had was like 0.127 on the outside diameter, so I wanted a press fit in there. So I machined it back just a little bit and left a little step section on it, and then I pressed this part into the actual tip, so I got a much larger hole. If you're familiar with spray guns, you would know that that's a pretty darn good size hole when the average size is like 1.2 to 1.6 for spraying. So this is nearly what, 2.5, so 2.5 to 2.7 millimeter hole. So definitely big. So the gel coat's super thick, so you need something to be able to get that out of there. And this particular tip works flawlessly for what I need it to do, and I got like 20 bucks in it. So if you want to modify one and you don't have a lathe, you can drill the hole in the actual stock tip that comes with the gun. Just don't break through the outer section of this, because when it's, and then of course when I drilled that out, I had to drill this hole to allow air to flow around the outside of that tip, so that hole there was made bigger. But when you have it on here, the tip protrudes out just a fraction out the end of it. So you'll need to do that. Plus, when I spray, I do not use the fan pattern. I use basically straight stream. It's still fanning anyways to about a 2-inch wide span, which is more than what I'm looking for when it comes to applying the gel coat in the mold. Anyways, that's my spray gun. Oh, and I run the air pressure around 35 PSI on here. So anyways, that's my spray gun. If this will help you out, then by all means. Anyways, stay tuned. When this gel coat's dry, we'll come back and lay it up with our matting. That's it. The gel coat in the mold is dried. I went ahead and used the mold to measure out my pieces that need to go in here, and I went ahead and pre-cut them. It's basically the same thing in reverse this time. I cut the pieces and then I cut the fingers in it so that when it bends in, that these can overlap. And then I have smaller pieces cut for the ends, and then a piece of scrap in case I need to patch in anything. I have my bubble rollers. What I like to do is when I spray something, I clean my spray gun, and then the residual acetone that was used to clean the spray gun, to clean all the parts, I reuse it to put all my bubble rollers in it, and use that to clean the bubble rollers. So I usually take the paper towel and I drop it over the top to keep the evaporation down lower. But we are ready to lay it up. I'm gonna pause real quick. I'll go ahead and mix the material, and then we will get started. Resin mixed up. There's about 16 ounces of fiberglass resin with about 5 cc's of catalyst, MEK catalyst. So what we're going to do is we'll start by laying the resin into the mold first. For applying the layers, all we do is just put a thin coat in here, and it helps with saturation much quicker when it comes to laying the parts up. This should go pretty fast. When I start to lay it up, I will speed the video up. If you're unfamiliar with the types of resins and stuff, I will put a link in the video or video card in there so you can reference the video that talks about the materials, types of resins that I use, and the bubble rollers. Anyways, we'll speed it up from here. right, so what we do is we have, there might be something hard in the glass here I've been trying to work an air bubble out of. But for the most part, if you have any puddles of resin in there, you can squeegee out most of the resin out of your brush, and you can actually go through it. And this is pretty dry, so I mean, it's to an extent it's dry. It's still rather wet as far as laying up glass would go. And being that this thing has a weird curve to it, I don't actually have a really good option for a bubble roller to roll in this contour. I have one that it is kind of oval shaped, that I've modified, a straight one, to kind of give some for arched angles, but it's not enough for this particular part, so it took a lot longer to bubble roll out because I could only use like a side of the item. And what I'm doing here with a brush is there's still a couple little micro bubbles in there, and I'm just working them out by hand with the actual brush. For the most part, it's all good. The part is laid up. We will probably move on and just let her be. Let this cure up. All right, our part is now dry, and we're ready to take it out. So at this point, when you go to remove them, especially if you spray it, you get your extra overspray on the edge of the mold, and sometimes that can be a booger because it can cause, especially if you use matte, it can cause a mat to get stuck in on this area, and when you pull it, the string, this kind of string stuff, can actually pull and snag and pull your gel coat if you make your gel coat too thin. But we'll give it a work. So at this point, you basically just grab a hold and you start unsnapping it from the edge of the mold. You can see you don't have to overflex it. You'll hear it popping. So we just continue to go around. At this point, I think we're about ready. I got a pair of pliers here, and usually what I use the pliers for is I'll grab a hold of the overhang that's on there. Just not ready yet. And we may have to use some air. Oh, there we go. There it is. It just fell out on its own. Voila! We have it. All right. So there's two times that you worry in your mold making experience. The first one is, will your plug come out of the mold? And then the second one, will your part come out of your mold? Once you have gotten a part out of the mold, you feel so much better. It's a lot of work to have your part stick in the mold. As you can see, being that I left the wax sheen on the mold, you can see it where it took the gloss, because if you've seen the video where the mold had a lot of gloss in it, I left, but I put the wax in there because I don't feel that the mold is ready to buff the wax off of it. It's still pretty darn shiny, but like I said, this part's going to get sanded anyways, and it'll get painted after that. Here's the nice thing: when you make a mold and you lay your gel coat in it, as you can see, you have a gel coat line, so it gives you your perfect reference line for cutting the excess material off all the way around. So you're able to trim it, sand it, and have a really nice looking part. So here we are, our first part taken off the mold. I'll get it trimmed up and I'll show you what it looks like when it's trimmed up, and then that'll pretty much conclude this series of videos. So I hope you enjoyed this so far. I'll go ahead and get it trimmed and we'll come right back. All right, we have our part rough trimmed. As you can see, it's cut off. Here's the old piece. This was the excess that's on there. So you want to make sure when you lay it up that you make yourself have some excess, to help with getting it out. So in case you have to use a pair of pliers or something like that, wedges. This is it. The shape is basic. I still have, finish work to do. As far as whatever shape I'm going to do in the front, I just put a basic radius on there. May keep it, I may change it, you never know. With the 2 layers of 1.5 ounce mat, it gave it an average thickness of about 3/32 of an inch, or 2 to 2.5 millimeters. You metric guys. As far as its rigidity, it's pretty darn rigid. Perfect for a tire wheel hugger. Can't complain with the thickness. I'm actually kind of happy with it. So yay, we have our first part off the mold. And if you're unsure and don't know what you need to use to cut that excess off, I find that the best tool is a Dremel style rotary tool with either fiberglass reinforced cutting disc or this diamond plated metal disc, and it cuts through it like butter. You just, like I said, when you have your gel coat line, you're able to see it. You just kind of follow around with it, and voila, cut it off. Here we are. Well, this concludes making a fiberglass mold and a part. This is just the basics. Like I said, if you are in the future going to make molds and you're going to have things with like undercuts or different shapes, whatever, consider 2-part, multi-part. I've made molds up to 4 parts before in order to get the part out of the mold. This part came out very easy. Like I said, that's simply because of its rounded shape, and it's considered a dump mold. So in theory, you turn it upside down, the part should theoretically fall out. But you're making a precision part. Basically, this is mimicking the actual internal for exact measurement. So anyways, like I said, the finish is great on this thing. Like I said, it's not glossy like the mold was, but that's simply because I left the wax in because the mold is unseasoned. So anyways, that concludes the video, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. Follow my other videos that I have on there as far as fiberglass materials used, wiring if you're into motorcycles. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you much. Bye-bye.